Hi, everyone. It is with great excitement that I welcome you back to AI Showbiz Summit 4.0. And next, we are going to hear from a dear friend of mine and truly, I think, one of the most brilliant experts on AI and emerging tech in our era. And I'm delighted to introduce Zada Beasley, founder, CEO of ZataData.
So much, Molly, and thank you so much for the AI Showbiz team for having me. I'm so very grateful, and at this time would like to just talk about how I got here and how what we're doing now. So I would say my career has been on a natural progression. But before I start with the career, I think it's important to discuss my why. And I was raised if you will, by DJs and about a lot of, if you will, technical engineers, engineering types. And very early on, I was always focused on the future. And after I did my homework for school, which I love mathematics and I've always loved physics and science, but I'm also extremely creative. So I was always great with, art and music because I was raised with music. And I really enjoyed watching the Jetsons. And so I would study the Jetsons when I got home from school. And we're talking about, the late 70s, early 80s. And I'm thinking to myself, one day I'm going to create a world where we are living like the Jetsons. And so throughout my talk, you'll hear me reference the Jetsons because I kind of pull my inspiration from a lifestyle that adds value, that allow us to connect, but also allows us to interface as human beings with machines. So I would say my career started, with a natural progression. I started out, if you will, designing a handheld transborder data device for the U.S. Postal Service headquarters building. And when I did that, we were working with the Canadian data and all of the, if you will, packages that were being delivered in Canada. And there was no way to track those packages back then. And it was the first, if you will, system of its kind. And although we were using, mainframe databases, it was something that I was able to code, if you will, and Fortran, and be able to, if you will, have it manufactured as a handheld device. And it was the first of its kind. It saved the U.S. Postal Service headquarters $50 million, which was a big deal back then. And it allowed all the packages that were leaving the U.S. going into Canada to be tracked. And it was under, if I was designing it under a lot of skepticism, it was so much disbelief, and not everyone was, if you will, on board. And that has been, if you will, the reoccurring theme throughout my career, because I've been designing in industry over 22 years in an environment where there was a lot of skepticism, where there was a lot of disbelief, where there was a lot of folks who just were just not really understanding what the need would be and how it would look, and so naturally they were skeptical, and that's a lot of pressure. I went on then to roll out, if you will, Windows, in the late 90s. And before doing that, I was working in an area with Martin Marietta, where I was designing the heads-up display for the A10 low altitude safety and targeting enhancement computer. And I would spend a lot of time, if you will, in the lab with the simulator, sitting in the cockpit, going through the user experience, if you will, having empathy and compassion for what it's like as a pilot to fight in a war. And at that time, it was Operation Desert Storm. And have to focus on the target while the plane would fly simultaneously. And what, if you will, heads up display in his helmet or in his windshield, his if you will, a heads up, how it would look and what it needed to look like for him to stay focused. And so that system is still if you will, in use today. And this is all, if you will, artificial intelligence technology, voice-driven technology. Again, we're forward thinking, designing the future now. And so then I went on to if you will, follow through with that, work on the calculations for GPS, the commercial side of GPS. That also led me to working on NASA contracts to design, if you will, and launch 3 GPS satellites And so going through that process, and those projects were more long-term projects. And so launches were very important, usually, 10 to 18 months project time. And so we were grateful when we had a launch, because that just meant that, the system was up and running, but not all the launches, if you will, went successfully. And so we also had to deal with some anomalies after, spending lots of time, if you will, writing code and launching, going through the launch process, and then working with, satellite application systems to, if you will, retrieve the data that the satellites collect. So as you know, those systems are still also in space. And then designing other features for the satellites, like some of the cameras and some of, the other data collection devices that are actually on the satellites. So continuously moving through the artificial intelligence, if you will, hierarchy. And as we move forward, I started working specifically with the intelligence community, and everything that I did there was definitely forward thinking, definitely ahead of its time, and definitely something that I can't talk about here. However, I'm sure many of you are aware kind of, what some of those things are, since, we're using them now, some of them in commercial spaces. I would have to say my biggest driver in being so, if you will, artificial intelligence, machine learning focus is understanding how to utilize data, but also how to architect the data, and how to place the data, where to place the data, so that my algorithms can communicate and retrieve the information needed with an output that is expected. And some of these, although I just explained it very simply here, but as I'm having discussions with some of my colleagues or some of those in industry, some of them are pretty new to artificial intelligence, and they think it's a brand new field, or they think that, this is just, something that's becoming more widespread over the last 5 years. But someone like me, who's been in industry 22 years, this is really basically all I've done. And and I've also created, if you will, opportunities to build infrastructures and business models that will align clients with, put them in a position to be competitive, to digitally transform, and to modernize. And I think it's also important as a leader in technology to be able to have the conversations with, the C-suites, or, all the executive staff, and say to them, here's where I think, you are, here's what I hear you saying, here's what I understand, and based on your, your request, here is a potential, if you will, technology roadmap that would help you get to where you want to go. And I think it's really important as a technologist to create, if you will, your ideas in one space, like in the lab. So for me, it's important for me to continue to keep my skill set of development very, very sharp. Although I'm not doing that for industry, I keep that skill set very, very, very sharp, because I work on my own business, which is ZataData. And I've been in startup mode with ZataData for over 12 years. ZataData was my senior class project name in undergrad at Howard University, where I majored in systems and computer science, which is electrical engineering, computer science, and mathematics minor. I also finished my master's at Johns Hopkins, majoring in, I have a master's, if you will, the MBA in organizational business behaviors, with an emphasis of technology marketing. And so I put those, if you will, skill sets together as I am moving through industry. But then even now, as the world is facing a pandemic, I've been working for the last year and a half now on some new technology that I call it, if you will, machines with machines with empathy, machines with compassion. And I think it's very important to have humans be able to build trust, and trusting relationships with machines to be able to, if you will, connect with machines in a way that they do trust them. I realize that we are in a pandemic and the social distancing is not having a positive effect on a lot of human beings at this time. And so we're relying very heavily on our understanding of technology. But imagine having a robotic buddy that gets you, right? This is where we are. Like, we are here. And I've been working on, systems like this that would help us prepare for, if you will, life, like being in a pandemic or being isolated or being, so socially distanced, so that you wouldn't have to also be emotionally distant, which a lot, if you will, of people in the world are confusing social distancing with emotional distancing. So I know there are a lot of folks who think that we are a long way away from having machines that are, if you will, emotionally ready to connect with a human, but that's what I'm working on. Like, I'm almost there, and I'm almost ready to, show the world what I have. And as I'm in the discussions with investors, right now, I welcome the discussions that I would, future discussions that I would have to discuss the pieces of the puzzle that I'm creating, the pieces, the actual components of the overall system that I'm creating, as an ideology, but also as a realization of what it would look like to have a ZataData, in your possession, and what that means for the world. So now I want to talk about the importance of, maintaining and having secure data in a cloud environment, as long as you're able to create components of a system. And it's very important in the cloud that you are able to architect the data in a way that it can be manipulated, so that you are able to show exactly, have a clear picture of accurate, real-time data. And let me give you an example. So let's say I'm interested in having a discussion. I just lost my cat or something. Let's just say that I just lost my cat, and I'm interested in having a discussion, not necessarily official therapy session, but more of just a comfort session. It would be nice to have the ability, and it is a nice to have the ability to log in and have a conversation with a machine, to be able to trust that your dialogue, it would not go anywhere, and to be able to have a discussion without judgment, so that the machine can feel your empathy and your pain and sympathize with you, and be able to communicate the sympathy that the machine has as if it is human. And I know that's a very small example, but just think about how many people are struggling right now in this social distancing requirement that we have across the country, and across the world, and not having the ability sometimes to, just have the empathy and receive the sympathy that they're needing. And all those who are suffering right now, who are losing loved ones, who unfortunately are having to deal alone with some of their struggles. So having the artificial intelligence that has the capability of being in your experience and empathizing and sympathizing with your feelings, your emotions, and the process is what I'm working on. So Molly,
I was talking, I forgot to unmute myself.
okay.
I was so moved by your words, and I mean, talk about someone who's dealt with adversity and triumphed. And it makes us realize we're not alone, and we can accomplish great things with great effort. Which is my first question that's coming in for you. In this COVID pandemic period, how is it impacting you, and how are you able to, how is it affecting your business, and then what advice do you have for the rest of us dealing with all of this?
So I would say, unfortunately, I'm in the middle of, I'm working on several algorithms right now. And so my lifestyle it already had a balance as an ambivert of some degree of social distancing, because that's just what's required for the nature of, kind of what I design and work on. But I think for me, because I'm an ambivert and there's a real need to connect with humans and network and be able to make eye contact and, just smell another human being in the room, which affects all of our, if you will, faculties. It You could lose inspiration and motivation very quickly, if you don't have if you you're not able to, or limited by creating the balance. And so what I think is important for me, and what has helped me, is staying centered and being grounded as much as possible. I spend a lot of time at the lakes. I spend a lot of time in nature, and I'm able to gain my inspiration as unfortunately, I'm watching the reports, and it's really, really, it can be scary, it can be overwhelming, and I can go through that list, or I can focus on, well, what is the new way of living? How is life going to be different? And how can I, as Zada Beasley, who is the founder and CEO of ZataData, continue to affect change in this current climate? And I think I know, as a visionary, I'm right in sync. What I'm designing and what I'm creating is what is needed. I mean, unfortunately, there are some human beings who don't have the capacity, if you will, to have empathy. They haven't been able to kind of move through the space of showing compassion. But these are the missing pieces between not just human beings, but human and machine.
Thank you, Zada. Okay. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a while, and I've seen you, working with these huge clients and everything. We have a question about attracting consulting work. What advice would you give to people out there on how this is an emerging tech group of people, some of whom have had some consulting work, some have had a lot, but what do you think works for you with attracting these amazing clients? What advice do you have?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Molly. That's a great question. I think I guess the key element in attracting new work is to stay open-minded and stay global in your perspective. Like, you got to think big picture. So unfortunately, if you limit yourself just to U.S. business, you don't, if you will, get a chance to see what the rest of the world needs. For instance, you can test a lot of my code is being tested in Singapore right now, because that's just where they are, right? If you can go all through Asia and work through, some of the clients that are in Asia. But if we're global, I have a lot of teams that are in India and different parts of India, all over India. And then I have a lot of teams that are in Europe. And so if we think about this globally, then we can do what we need to do from a perspective of how can we, make life in the world better, as opposed to life in just our local city better. So I think that is the number one missing part. I think some people start inside, kind of their domain and where they live, because that is where they're comfortable. But AI is not about staying in your comfort zone. Like, you can't create the new now, next, and the future and be comfortable at the same time. That is just impossible.
Oh, that's a good segue to a question I want to ask, because I wrote a textbook about stepping outside of one's comfort zone.
Yes.
And you've touched on some of this throughout your talk, but just to summarize, what would you say to people who are not comfortable stepping out of their comfort zone?
Well, like I said earlier, I was talking about my why, and there was never a time where I wasn't clear, why I'm so passionate about this space. And if you're not clear about why you're doing what you're doing, you will be tested. So in order to maintain, the vision and be able to create, make your vision and dreams a reality, it's important to stay connected to your why, because you're going to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you learn this over time, just understanding this is the nature of the business. Being uncomfortable becomes the comfort zone. And so you kind of have to keep going back to your why. You just kind of have to keep thinking about, why am I really doing this? What difference what impact am I having? And effectively, what am I changing? And you have to be able to do that sometimes in a vacuum, because you don't see results right away. When I was designing, the GPS, if you will, for, doing the calculations for a GPS for the commercial space, I envisioned what the system would do and what it would look like. And I had to hold on to that vision despite the skepticism, despite all the naysayers, despite, those who have the can't do mentality. And I was always speaking about the difference it would make and, the impact it would have. And look at where we are. I mean, even when I did those, calculations then, we were moving into spaces where I was working overseas as well while I was at HP, and I was working in semiconductor test division, and we were testing, if you will, smart test chips for smartphones and for smart TVs and smart devices in the late 90s. And those patents were going to and fro, and we're talking about tens of thousands of patents. And if I didn't stay focused on my why, in most of those spaces, I was the only minority in those labs in Korea, in Taiwan, in Singapore, in Japan. And I had to deal with a lot of folks being very shocked that I was there, and I actually am an engineer, and I could, well versed in this space, and I knew what I was doing. And if I wasn't clear about my why, I wouldn't have been able to finish and if you will, launch those systems. So staying focused on your why is imperative.
I really, really appreciate your time today with us, and may the force be with you.
May the force be with you.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Molly.
I can't wait till we're together in person and give you a big virtual hug, and keep up the great work. So proud of you.
Thank you.